All right, thank you for tuning in. So I wasn't a very good history student, and I shared that with you before. However, when I would get good grades in history when I was in school, it wasn't because I was a good student. It was because somebody said to me, you know, they made a movie about that. Or they wrote a novel about that. And for some reason, when a historical novel accurately depicts what happened in history, for some reason, maybe a psychologist will explain this to me one day, but for some reason I was able to absorb the factual stuff in a real interested way. I became interested when there was a story somehow wrapped around the history of something, rather than just dates and occurrences and battles and names. You know, there was a story I could wrap my, and especially when it was in like my area of the country, wherever I happened to be, which was New York when I was a kid. If the teacher said, Nathan Hale was hanged right down the road, I was like, whoa, where? Did I ride my bicycle past that place? And so that kind of thing. So one of the things about the Napoleon Bonaparte years that has always kind of escaped me was I didn't really have something I could sink my teeth into. And maybe that will change now. So whatever I didn't learn in school, maybe I'm going to learn now with a book called The Tricolor and the Scimitar. Jean-Paul Sinclair Lewis is on the phone. He's a journalist, a contributor to various Spanish magazines. He's a researcher, an international consultant, and the subtitle for The Tricolor and the Scimitar is The Chevalier Chronicles Book 1. So it is a historical novel, and I'm looking forward to it because I will learn something from it. It's an interesting time in human history, I think, is a better way to say that. It's an honor to have you on, sir. Good morning, John Paul. Good morning.
Good morning.
Where are you?
I'm in Washington, D.C., in the belly of the beast.
So tell me about your interest. Am I right? This is about Napoleon Bonaparte and his contribution to us as humanity?
Yes, it is. In a way, there's so much there. The Tricolor and the Scimitar is the first historical novel that I know about that recounts Napoleon Bonaparte, who was only 27 years old, along most of his officers were also in their early 20s and so forth. It recounts his army of the Orient and 35,000 men, women, and even children, invasion and occupation of Egypt and the Holy Land between 1798 and 1801. Now, the book opens with the conquest of Malta in June 1798, and then moves to Egypt, and the Death March to Cairo, the Battle of the Pyramids, the annihilation by Admiral Nelson of the French Mediterranean fleet at the Battle of the Nile. Now, he becomes marooned. He has his men, but his lifeline to France has been cut off by the Battle of the Nile because the British destroyed his fleet. Bonaparte and his troops of 35,000 soon confront fanatical resistance, insurrection, guerrilla desert warfare, the plague, ancient superstitions, slavery, harems, and the one good part about this whole story, and the birth of Egyptology. He also brought hundreds of scientists with him, and they are the ones who measured the pyramids and rediscovered ancient Egypt and brought them back to Europe.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
The Rosetta Stone is one, although it was stolen by the British, but the French were clever. They made copies. So a lot of this stuff was brought back to France after he left Egypt and are now in museums, or the obelisk in the middle of Paris, that tall obelisk, that comes from Egypt.
So did you write the book as a story for people like me, or was there a reason why you made it an historical?
I wrote it for people like you.
Good, because I love this. I love this kind of stuff. And if you had written it just as a historical book, it probably would have been very interesting to some academic, and I'm not him. That's just, for some reason, I've always needed to have a story associated with a with a history lesson.
Well, this is a very, very good story. I mean, I used 19th century French military records and journals, and I bring to life the historical actors of this incredible time in history, from rankers, guys who were nothing, just, rank and file, to famous generals, and to a young Bonaparte, and the ruthless leaders that resisted him once he was alone in Egypt. And he was very successful at what he did, but he was also very, very ruthless. It would be nothing for him to murder 4,000 Turkish prisoners because he didn't want to deal with them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this book has everything you want. Everything.
What was the reason for the elaborate uniforms that we visualize whenever we think of Napoleon? Like, for example, the Revolutionary War, you think of the Patriots as having basically rags to wear, right? I know there were uniforms, so to speak, but they weren't like these elaborate things you always see with Napoleon's army. Was there some like psychological reason for that?
Well, the French army during the Napoleonic period that lasted more or less 20 years constantly changed uniforms. Each regiment had their own uniforms. Actually, his invading army to Egypt was very well equipped. It was basically the army from Italy that was transferred over to the Army of the Orient, and then they started their invasion. But these guys were fairly well equipped for a year or so. Now, once they got cut off, then all the fabric, they didn't have any fabric. They didn't even have any needles. It was very, very difficult, but they patched themselves up for a while. But at the very end, they were in rags. There was a lot of custom tailors that were soldiers, so they helped. But the elaborate uniforms only came later when he was emperor, really. Here, it was just basic stuff.
Oh, okay.
It was basic stuff. But once you became emperor, then you see a lot of elaborate uniforms. But they constantly changed, almost yearly, depending on the regiment, whether you're cavalry or infantry or generals or Maréchal of France. So that was constantly changing. But the army that invaded Egypt, it was simple but practical.
Right. The tricolor refers to the flag, right?
Correct.
And the scimitar is the weapon. Was it a sword or something?
Turkish sword, slightly curved.
Oh.
Very heavy. I mean, you get slashed by that, you're dead.
Yeah, I would think so.
I mean, they were very heavy, they were curved, sharp, and they were very, very effective when used by somebody on horseback, especially. Much more effective than what the French had. They just had regular European swords. Some of them were curved, but not like a centaur, who goes back hundreds of years. Heavy and sharp and short. So at close quarter, they were very deadly.
So again, my question about the clothing, I guess, is similar to my question about the flag. Why is that? And this is not just France alone. I mean, obviously, but why? What is the psychological reason for the flag? I mean, when we're marching, we have to have a flag. Does it hold us together? Is it part of the human bonding thing? That this is my team. What is the reason for that?
I think both of those items are correct. It represented the Republic, which was in trouble, always in trouble. So they needed a flag for everybody to rally around with. And I'm sorry, your second question again was?
Well, I just didn't know if...
It was a bonding feeling. Yes, it was a bonding feeling. It was very much of a bonding feeling. When you don't have a king anymore, the king was already beheaded. So you had a bunch of guys in Paris that was trying to unify the country, and soldiers, and in particular the French, will bond and rally around the flag. All countries do. I mean, we do it too, and so did the British. The flag is very important because you have to have something. You have to have something. If you have no king, then you at least have. You must have something symbolic that represents, what you want.
Why did he attack the Holy Land? What was it about that area of the world that he was interested in?
It was first Egypt, then he invaded the Holy Land. The French wanted Egypt because they wanted to colonize it, number one. Number two, it was more or less available to them, although it wasn't. They had to fight off, one Turkish army after another. And they also wanted to destroy or hamper British trade from India. And by it, that would harm England. The only country left in Europe that still defied him. And it was his idea a few years earlier to say, well, let's occupy Egypt. Mm-hmm. A, it's close. B, we can colonize it. It's rich. It has the Nile. We can clean all that mess up and block the English, because they would have to go through Egypt, and then from Egypt cross the Mediterranean into the Atlantic, and then to England. So if that's denied to them, if Egypt is denied to them, that would put a hole in their pocketbook. Mm-hmm. And so that was the second main item.
And that was one of Napoleon's good points, was that he didn't just go to Egypt and then destroy all of the pyramids and everything that was there. You pointed out that he actually brought out scientists so they could make that a place of study.
Exactly. He brought over 300 scientists, astronomers, mathematicians, physicists. He brought the best. And they established the Institute of Egypt to study all of this. In fact, he's the one who dug out a lot of this ancient relics, and it came to life. The Europeans embraced it.
Who is the Captain Chevalier? Who is he? A real person, or is he a fictional character?
He's a composite.
Okay. And
he's a composite.
And so the story, we follow him in this 4-part series, right?
Correct. He's the main protagonist.
So he's kind of who I would follow, even though he wouldn't show up in the history books, or would he?
No, he would not. But you'd find a lot of officers just like him, young, full of themselves, adventurous, unafraid of death. So you cannot escape him. He'll bring you everywhere, along with his friends. So he kind of moves about. He's a hussar. He's a mounted hussar. That means he's on horseback. So he was used as a courier, basically. So he is eyewitness or a participant in all the major events of the novel.
Does he agree with the strategies, I guess, of Napoleon, or even the ruthlessness?
In the beginning, most of the officers and men believed in him, but they became weary. And after a year or so, they asked themselves, what are we doing here?
I bet.
What are we doing? This is the land of scorpions, sand, and plague.
Yeah.
So there was many men and officers that became disillusioned, but they fought on nevertheless under all these hardships. The plague was the worst. That killed thousands. That just killed thousands, and and they're also assassinated. If you were walking along the streets of Cairo, for example, it became a very, very dangerous environment for Europeans, especially for the French army.
You often wonder when you hear about dictators. Let me use Hitler as an example. You often wonder, why did the soldiers go along with that crazy mindset that he had? And I don't think we gave him a chance, because we went and took care of him before they had a chance. But was the reason that Napoleon's guys started to turn on him, was it because they had more time to think about it than in modern days? Because of
there was a lot of boredom, but dictators. Men will follow dictators if they give the men initial success. Bonaparte had a great star. I mean, he marched from victory to victory to victory. And then he became a little bit too popular. And the authorities in Paris, well, let's send him to Egypt. Maybe we could lose him there.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's another. Now, this rumor has not been proven, but I'm sure he was so popular, so successful, that they saw him as a rival for power. And in fact, when he came back from Egypt after 2 years, he seized power effortlessly.
Yeah, man.
He became first consul. He was, so therefore he was the boss of the council who ruled France. And then he became emperor, where he had total power. And I mean, men followed him until the very last moment for 20 years, because Napoleon Bonaparte just gave them victory after victory after victory. And there's nothing better than for a French soldier to be involved in victory after victory.
Tell me about the book itself. It's written in first person from the perspective of Captain Chevalier. Is that right?
Correct. That is correct. That is correct.
And it takes place 1852? So I'm looking at the...
1898. That's when it all started, and it ended in 1801.
Okay.
Was there any conflict because of the different religions when he invaded the Middle East? Were they even aware of the other religion?
When I started this historical military novel, in my research, I was amazed that very little has changed in the Middle East. When Napoleon Bonaparte invaded, and now nothing much has changed. The same societal elements exist today, such as tribalism, religious fanaticism, power conflicts, and religious hatred between Christian, Muslims, and Jews. They were all fighting each other. And what I do is I place my readers into the heads of my characters, so the reader becomes part of the story and participates in this fantastic adventure.
The book again is called. Let me make sure I got it right. The Tricolor and the. Do you say tricolor? Is that how you pronounce it?
All as many ways: tricolor, tricolor.
Oh, okay.
Tricolor for the English.
Tricolor.
Okay. And Jean-Paul Sinclair Lewis is our guest. Jean-Paul, can I allow a listener to say something to you? We got a phone call.
Yes, of course.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you for calling and for being patient with us. You're on the air.
It's a little off topic, but he has obviously studied Napoleon. I was wondering if he knows anything about the Brothers Lafitte, and were they actually agents for Napoleon?
The Lafitte brothers, those pirates in southern Louisiana?
Yes.
Yes. They were not associated with Napoleon Bonaparte. He was a free, how do you say, he was a freebooter. Although some of his men did fight with Napoleon, but Jean Lafitte himself he might have been a Bonapartist, but he never participated in any battles or had any official communications with him or any ideas of invading. So that's what I know about him. But he was his own private concern. But like I said, several of his men were surely, as in the Alamo, by the way, there were several Frenchmen there too as well, also part of Napoleon's army. Wow. When the kings came back and Napoleon went into exile, a lot of his devotees couldn't stay in France. So there was a diaspora. They went everywhere. They went to Louisiana. They went to the Carolinas. They went to Australia because they just didn't want to live underneath the kings, and so they left. And a lot of them were very good in artillery and military tactics, and they usually gave their hosts, advice and their experience as a fighter under Napoleon's army. And they were very helpful for those causes that were fighting for their freedom.
All right. Sir, did you have a follow-up or you wanted to say?
No, I just wanted to say thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for the call.
Well, thank you.
Interesting stuff. Wow. I had no idea. And the French had a big role in the Revolutionary War, too. We know that. So.
Of course. Yeah. But that was official. That was official.
Ah, okay. Big difference. One of the things I think the listeners would like to know is that in the book you have the principal historical characters of the Egyptian expedition all listed out and with little tiny biographies on each one of them.
That's correct. Like Denon, who was one of the founders of the Louvre, he was the digger. He drew everything that he could possibly see. He was a very good draftsman. He didn't really bring back anything physical, but what he did bring back was hundreds of watercolors and sketchings and so forth back to Paris. And he was so good that Napoleon made him head of the Louvre. So wow. For a while, and he was responsible for putting the Louvre together, and especially those articles that were brought back from Egypt to France, and those things that could be collected after. Wow. So if you go to the Louvre, if you could go see all this Egyptian stuff, it's Denon, Denon, the guy who was he was my age, in his late 50s and 60s, and you couldn't get him off horseback. He was always drawing. There was never enough time, but he had to move because the Muslims were right behind him to cut his throat. So he always had some things he finished and some things were only partially done because he just had to get out of there.
Jean-Paul, you've held, I don't mean to be rude, but we're out of time and you've held us spellbound. I want to make sure the listeners can get the book. I found it on Amazon. Do you have a different website you want to recommend?
No, Amazon is good. Amazon is good. Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble, I guess those are the two main ones.
Yeah. Okay. Again, the book is, let me try the French way, Tricolore.
I like it.
The Tricolore and the Scimitar. Jean-Paul Sinclair Lewis, if you're speaking it with an American accent, the Tricolor and the Scimitar. Jean-Paul, thank you so much for being on the air with us today.
You pronounced it very, very, very well, Larry.
I hope so. Thank you,
so,
sir.
Yes, please get it, guys. Get it. Especially you, Larry. I think you won't be able to put it down.
I think you're right. I was already reading some of it online. All right. Thank you, sir. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM.
Fox News Radio, I'm Lillian Wu. The president on Twitter this morning doubling down on demands for border security, which he's threatened to shut down the government over.
His thinking is that we'll get along just fine with a government shutdown. Essential services will still be provided. Social security checks will still go out.
Fox's Doug McElway.